And so I'm just going to go on here. I know where the center is. And I'm just going to draw a circle for the expansion. And I'm going to take this parting tool, and I'm going to go in. I'm just a little bit low. I'm going to raise this up just a tad. Yes, I know you're supposed to turn the lathe off when you do that. And I'm probably in, I'm guessing about 3/16 of an inch. And I think that's going to be plenty for when we mount it on the chuck. So now we're going to start by shaping the outside of the bowl. Question?
Could you address when you should be wearing a face shield and when you shouldn't?
Thank you. I do have a face shield. I do have safety glasses on. Safety is critical. Yeah, but if you notice, I'm standing off to the side, and I'm going to plan on standing to the side. I'm going to try, and I don't know if this works as far as sound goes. So I hear it's iffy. So I'm going to try and turn tonight without it. At home, I use it almost exclusively. Always use it.
Another question. Face shield versus respirator.
Face shield versus respirator. I don't have a respirator, so when I'm sanding and in a high dust environment, I buy these very inexpensive dust masks that work really, really well. They run about $10, and they've got a carbon filter in it, and they come with extra filters, as you can see. And once you put a filter in, then they fit really well. I'd like to have a respirator, but I don't have one, so I use a face shield and a dust mask when I'm sanding. Any other questions? Okay, we're going to start turning the outside of this bowl. And I tend to turn rather quickly. And I'm going to hold the gouge into my hip, and I'm going to turn the flute about 45 degrees, and I'm going to have it down about 45 degrees, and I'm just going to start taking off the side. I don't bother to clean the edge up usually because it's just going to be a natural occurring situation as I turn the side. At this point in time, I got to start thinking also about where I'm going to put the bottom of this. A bowl this size, I'm going to probably make the bottom closer to half the diameter rather than a third. It's thin enough that if somebody uses it as a fruit bowl, I want to make sure it sits well on the table. So it'll probably be a little closer to And at this point in time, I also want to start thinking about the shape. Do I want to make an OG in here? Do I want to make it just round? I'm going to put a foot on it so it stands off the table. But now's the time to determine what shape you want to make this. And tonight, I think just for sake of doing it easy, I'm going to probably just go with a fairly round shape.
What speed are you turning?
I'm sorry?
What speed are you turning?
Oh. Right now it's at between 18 and 1900 RPM. I tend to turn rather quick as far as speed goes. So if this was a bigger piece of wood, obviously you can't be turning that quick. Okay, now it's time to determine exactly where we want to put the foot on this. I think was a 9-inch bowl. So if I make it about 4 inches on the bottom, I think would be a good size for the foot. So I need to take a little bit more off. Now I'm going to come in here and define that foot. I don't know if you noticed, that was a push cut rather than the pull cut I was doing. And you can see the difference in the quality of the cut. You get a much smoother, much finer cut. When I do bottoms, this would be a good example. If you look at the bottom of this bowl, I put a design in the bottom of it. I don't always do that anymore. I prefer a bowl that just has a little rounded bottom on it. And I do that just for the simplicity of sanding. This is a terrible bowl to try and sand into that edge and get the detail sanded good. So if you just put a nice rounded edge on it, when you go to sand it, it works out so nicely. So this is kind of the way I've graduated as far as the bottom of my bowls go. And so that's what I've done here. I've angled this a little bit. I'm going to clean this up a little bit. Run across the bottom. In doing that, I've cut my tenon down a little bit. I'm going to go just a little bit deeper on that. And I'm going to measure the foot. It's right at 4 inches on a 9-inch bowl, so it's right about just a little bit under half instead of being a third. But I think it's going to give it a better look when we turn it around. Now, as you can see, I talked earlier about a shear scrape. There's a lot of torn grain in here yet, some areas that I'd like to clean up. So I'm going to take this shear scraper, and I've ground this at 75 degrees, and I have a relatively sharp burr on it. And so I'm going to take that now, and I'm going to just use that to clean the bottom of this bowl up a little bit. And I can start, and I'm holding it about 45 degrees. And if you can see the shavings that are coming off, it's cutting, it's not scraping, even though it's called a scraper. These are just wonderful cuts that come off this tool. And you can go both directions with it. I know John Horn probably isn't going to like hearing this, but my first shear scrape tool was nothing more than a, what do you call these, John? A skew, that's right. John's good with skews. This was a real inexpensive skew that I had, and I wasn't using it as a skew, so I made a shear scraper out of it. I first learned this technique from a gentleman on the East Coast. His name escapes me. He did a class at Gene Colley's years and years and years ago.
It was Al Sturt.
Al Sturt, yes, thank you. It was Al Sturt.
I was in the same class, John.
Ah, who's that? Who's that? Ah, okay, yeah. Yeah, it was Al Sturt that taught this, and I started doing it, and it ends up being just a wonderful tool. And just and so at this point in time, I would go through and I would now sand this. I've still got a couple ripples in here I'd like to get out, so I'm going to hit this one more time. And again, you see the shavings that come off of that. They're just really, really, really delicate and nice. It doesn't take a lot of pressure, just very, very light cuts.
Question, John. Do you use a negative rate on that scraper?
Not on this scraper. This is on the outside. I don't want a negative rake on it. You could do it, but I get a better burr having just a regular flat scraper. So for the outside of the bowl, I generally don't use negative rake scrapers. We'll do that on the inside, but not on the outside. So I'd sand this now, and then I'd put a coat of sanding sealer on it before I turn it around. But before I do that, I'm just going to establish the top. And I'm going to come in on the back side of this. I'm going to turn my gouge almost closed. So this is a scraping cut. And I just want to make sure that I know where the top of the bowl is going to be. I don't know if you notice, I'm not turning the lathe off with a switch. I don't like to do that. I like turning it off with the speed control. My lathe at home will do that. This lathe does it. So I never have any surprises when I go to turn it on. I always know what speed it is. Right now, so I'm always starting from a low speed. If I had this speed up and I forgot where it was and I pull this, that speed control may have moved, and I didn't know it did, and it may be way too fast for what I'm doing. So I always use the speed control to stop the lathe. Any questions on this side of the ball?
Yeah, that technique does not work on all lathes.
No, it does not. Some lathes do not stop when you bring the speed control to 0. But on those lathes, I would still slow it down and then still stop it, so you know what speed you're going to turn it back up on. Safety is important. Any other questions on this side of the ball? Okay, let's turn it around.
John, I have a question. For the new turner, would you test fit your chuck before you pull it off?
I'm sorry?
Would you test fit your chuck before you take it off for a new turner? Obviously, you guys are done.
I'm hoping I got it the right dimension. The question was, did I test the chuck before I take it off the screw chuck? And no, I didn't. But I'm counting on my card to be pretty accurate, so we'll find out.
Would you recommend?
You can, yeah. I've done it enough, so I'm pretty confident that. And it fits pretty good. Now, because I'm using dovetail jaws, I'm not going to crank this thing down super tight. You don't need to. The dovetail is inside that chuck, or inside that tenon recess, and it's going to hold pretty well. Let's see how we are for. And see, it's running very true. So the inside of the bowls can be challenging. Some people start in the middle and work out. Some people start on the outside and work in. I'm going to start first by defining this edge before I do anything inside. I want to know exactly where this edge is going to be and what shape I'm going to make it. And I'm going to put a little bit of a. It's not going to go straight. The edge is going to come up a little bit. Now, one of the things that you have to be really careful about it doing that way is this edge gets razor sharp. And how do I know? I have about 8 stitches in my hand here from running into that bowl edge. So you want to be careful. The first thing I always do is either take a little bit of sandpaper or just knock that corner off a little bit so that you don't have that sharp cutting edge. Now I want to go in a little bit farther. I've got a little bit of the wood showing here yet, of the saw cut. That's good. Okay. I'm going to take a quick cut across the center. And now I'm going to define how thick I want this bowl. And I don't, when I'm turning this type of bowl, I want it to be used. It's a utility bowl. So I don't want a super thin wall. I want to have at least probably 5/16 or a quarter inch or maybe a little bit more. So I'm going to come in here and I've got the gouge completely closed. And look at it and say, yeah, I'm going to make it just a little bit thinner than that. Not much, but a little bit. So I think that looks like about a quarter of an inch. I think that's the wall thickness we're going to shoot for in turning this. So I tend to turn bowls from the outside in rather than the inside out. I like having mass in the middle to support what I'm turning. So when I get down inside, I've still got some support from wood. You can go in here and take this bottom out if you want, so you know where that screw chuck was. And I'm going to So I now want to establish this edge as I continue to work down, and I'll just do some steps in here to and this gouge is getting a little dull. One of the things I like about this gouge is I just turn it around and I have another edge on the other end. And I'm down about an inch, and it's fairly uniform. And I've got a lot of meat down here in the bottom yet to take off. But I'm going to take some of this off. still got quite a bit of meat in the bottom. It's pretty thick down there. Side's pretty good. I generally just use my fingers as calipers, and it works pretty well. I'm going to make one more cut into the bottom down here, but I think that's going to be it. If you have not used your fingers as calipers, what you ought to do is find a junk piece of wood and turn a bunch of bowls. And then cut them apart. And then you can look at the edge and you see, is my edge uniform going down? Do I have room in the bottom? How does it feel? You know, so it gives you good practice turning wood, turning bowls, and it tells you what it looks like inside. So there's a couple, we pass these around. Here's another one. This one's ash. I made it a little bit thicker, but it's still fairly uniform. And when I take the bottom off, you see it's going to get a little thinner on the bottom. So in this case, I got a little ridge about an inch down that I got to get, and then it gets a little thicker. So I'm going to come back and I'm sorry?
You still using your half-inch swept-back?
Still using the half-inch swept-back gouge.
Is that a half-inch across, or is it?
This is a U.S. half-inch gouge, half-inch in diameter of the shaft. The Europeans measure the opening. I've measured the outside of it. So this is getting pretty good. I've got a little ridge in here yet I want to try and get out. Yes.
At some point, would you cover the characteristics of your bowl gouge grind?
Yeah, I can do that. This grind has been called a swept-back grind. It's been called an Ellsworth grind. It's been called an Irish grind. I don't think mine is any of those. It's just a swept-back. When I grind it, and we can look at that later if somebody wants to see how I grind it, but I grind it back not as far as some people do. It's not a 40-40 grind. If you've heard of Stuart Batty and his famous 40-40 grind, Stuart used to say that the bevel should be 41.5 degrees. And that was the angle of a beaver tooth, which was the most efficient cut in the world. He's now since changed it from 40.5 to 40, and he says his wings and the edge are 40 degrees. It's much too steep or too shallow for me. I don't like a 40 degree. My grind is more in the neighborhood of 50 to 55 degrees. If I'm in a really deep bowl, I've got a grind that's even less shallow than that. It would go to like 65 or 70 degrees, just so I can get down into the bottom. The problem with a 40-40 grind is that if you're in a deep bowl, your grind is so shallow that you're fighting with the edge of the bowl gouge on the edge of your turning. So this is pretty good. I could make maybe one more cut on the bottom. The edges are pretty good. I'm going to take the bottom out, and then we'll see what it looks like. I don't know if you notice, I start most of the cuts with the gouge closed, or when I say closed, it being at 90 degrees. And as soon as I pick up the cut, I rotate it open to about 45 degrees or so. Now I have a little lump on the bottom. I have a little tear out on the side. We're going to try and get that out as well. And make one more cut down into the bottom. And I'm going to use a fresh gouge for that. You can hear the wood has moved a bit. Still got a little lump in the bottom. I like the shape's pretty good. It's got some rough edges. This is where I would use a negative rake scraper. You asked about that earlier. I don't like this on the outside. This is strictly inside for cleaning up. And I put a fresh burr on it before I came over so it feels nice and sharp. You can see the shavings coming off. It's a nice cut. Problem with using a negative rake scraper is you're still going to get some tear out on the end grain. And I may just try and make one more cut to eliminate that tear out, but I'm going to cut the bottom just a little bit.
John, on the outside of the bowl, you used your straight scraper, turned it 45 degrees, basically pull it around for a shear cut. Can you do that same thing with the negative rake scraper on the inside?
I can't with this negative rake scraper because it's ground back too far. I don't have good control on the tool rest because of the grind here. If I had this and left it round, I would consider maybe trying that, but not with the shape of this scraper. Some tear out in there that'll need to be sanded, but in general it's pretty good. I would maybe try one more cut if I was at home and had some time. I want to just clean this edge up a little bit, and I'm going to use my regular scraper, shear scraper for that. And I'm going to do it at 45 degrees. So at this point in time, I would now sand this and put a coat of sanding sealer on it when I'm done. And my sanding, I use I've had this old Milwaukee battery-powered drill for years and years and years, and it's absolutely wonderful for sanding the inside or the outside. And I just use the, I don't know if anybody's seen these. This is a paintbrush holder for snapping on the rim of a paint can to hold your paintbrush while you're painting. And they work wonderfully well for holding sandpaper. So you just put your sandpaper in it, they got a magnet on it.
Question, what grit do you use for that? What grit?
I would start, in this case, I would start at 120 or 180, depending on how the surface looks inside, and I'd go all the way to 400 or 600. And so let me put a 200 on there, and I'll just show you how I don't want to do a lot of sanding, just simply makes way too much dust. But I would just go in and I sand fairly slow, usually around 400 or 500 RPM. And inside but see all the dust it makes, so I'm not going to sand tonight. Any other questions before we turn this around?
At what point would you put sanding sealer on that?
After I sand it to about 400 or 600, then I put a sanding sealer on it, let the sanding sealer dry, and then my favorite finish is just like a Mahoney's walnut oil or a Doc's oil with a little micro wax in it, microcrystalline wax, and that's all I do for finishing for utility bowls like this that people want to use. Any other questions? Okay, let's turn this around, take the bottom off. Now there's several ways of doing that. You can make a jam chuck out of another piece of wood. You can make a jam chuck out of a piece of, in this case, a piece of PVC. You just put it on there and bring your tailstock up, hold it in place. This is why we put the indentation in to start with, so you can find the center. And so, as a jam chuck, now you can work and take this all the way down to where you want it to go, and then at the very end, take it off and take the bottom portion off with a skew. I'm going to use a vacuum chuck tonight, and I don't know if anybody has used a vacuum chuck before, but I don't need the tailstock now. And one of the goals I have in turning a bowl is you've got to eliminate the tenon, no matter what. I don't, every bowl I turn, you can't tell how it was chucked. I'm going to take all chucking marks off. If there's a tenon or a base, I'm going to take that off so that you have a nice, clean, decorated bottom, and somebody's going to pick it up and look at it and say, how did he chuck that? And so that's my goal, is to eliminate that completely. Yes?
What kind of investment are we talking about with a vacuum chuck?
Anywhere from $90 to $100 to $300 or $400. If you want to buy a gas vacuum pump, you're looking at $300 or $400 just for the pump. I bought this pump on eBay for $65 and then added the rest of the fixtures to it. I want to make sure that that's square or a little bit the other way. Make this a little bit smaller. I have another negative rake scraper that's a little smaller that I usually use on the bottom of bowls like this so that I can get into this corner. Yes.
Roughly, what's the vacuum draw on that? I mean, is it,
Right now I'm drawing 23 inches of mercury. And on this chuck that's about 4 inches, that's going to be close to 200 pounds holding this thing on. I don't need that. I could back this down to 15 inches of mercury easily. Oh, we got a little tear out on the bottom. I'm going to use a spindle gouge just to cut this bottom. And again, I would now sand this, get ready to finish it. And I'm going to add a little decoration on the bottom. I have a beating tool that I got from D-Way out on the West Coast. And I'm going to put a couple beads on the bottom. I'm just going to rock this back and forth a little bit. And there's the bottom done. So this bowl's got some nice pattern to it. If you look at it, it's got a ring on this side and a ring on this side, so it's pretty uniform. Any questions? Okay, let's take this off. The question is what?
How fast can you turn a bowl just if you're uninterrupted?
I've never tried real fast. the Dallas area wood turners had a section where they wanted people to do 3 different things, or do their demo in 3 different areas, and so they had 3 stages set up. So I had to turn the bowl 3 times in 20 minutes. And so I can do it in 20 minutes. But it's not something I normally do.
That's a little sweet.
So, thank you. Thank you.
John, do you do much with natural edge bolts?
Yeah, I've done some natural edge bowls. I've got a blank here that if I had not, that I harvested, if I had left this side complete, we could have made a natural edge bowl out of it. But I chose, just because of the blank, when I cut it, to cut this side flat too. But yeah, if we'd left the bark on this, we could easily have made this into a natural edge bowl. I don't turn a lot of end grain bowls. These are all side grain. The growth of the tree is going this way. You cut the pith out, and this happens to be a piece of Chinese pistachio that we took down in our yard about 6 weeks ago. It's still pretty wet, that's why I didn't turn it tonight. But this came out of that tree, and I put a bunch of these blanks in Neil's kiln to dry. Hopefully we get a really nice dry piece that we could turn tonight. But it didn't get dry as dry as I'd like, and the ones that did get dry cracked pretty bad. So I don't like just cutting blanks like this and trying to rush the drying process, because they'll tend to crack. Even though they were coated on the end grains, you're better off to cut it, rough turn it, leave it thick so you can let it warp, and let it dry more uniformly by taking all the insides out of it, and then let it dry for 6 or 8 months, and then finish it. Maybe a year. Wood like this dries naturally about 1 inch a year. So I like turning green wood, but it's either going to warp on you, and if you don't mind the warp, you've got to turn it fairly thin, because it will warp. Or you got to turn it thick and let it dry, and remount it and turn it again. So, any other questions? It's really good to see everybody tonight. This is the first time in 16 months that we've done this, and this has been fun. It's nice to get back together again after all the problems of the last 16 months. So I want to thank everybody for coming.